Far beyond myth, Atlantis may have been a civilization with knowledge surpassing that of today. There exists a memory older than history itself, a memory that surfaces in dreams, whispers through ancient texts, and echoes in the architecture of civilizations separated by oceans and millennia. This memory speaks of a golden age when humanity walked closer to the gods, when knowledge flowed like water from fountains of wisdom, when the boundary between the physical and the metaphysical was as thin as morning mist. The Greeks called it Atlantis. The Egyptians knew it as the homeland of the primordial kings. The Maya encoded it in their calendar as the previous world age. The Hindus remembered it as one of the 7 Dvipas, the sacred islands of antiquity. Every culture that has touched the deepest wells of human memory has drawn up the same water, tasted the same truth. There was something before, something magnificent, something that fell. But what if Atlantis was never meant to be found on any map? What if the greatest archaeological expedition should be directed inward, into the labyrinth of consciousness itself? What if the cataclysm that sank Atlantis beneath the waves was a metaphor for something far more profound than tectonic plates and flooding? Consider this. Every spiritual tradition speaks of a fall, a descent from a higher state of being into the density of material existence. The Gnostics called it the imprisonment of light in matter. The Vedic texts describe it as the movement from the Satya Yuga, the age of truth, into the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness. Even modern physics hints at it through entropy, the universe's inexorable slide from order into chaos. What if all these stories are describing the same event from different vantage points? What if Atlantis represents not a geographical location, but a state of consciousness that humanity once inhabited and lost? The implications are staggering. If Atlantis was a consciousness rather than a continent, then its technology was a technology of mind. Its power sources were not mechanical but metaphysical. Its destruction was not by water, but by the waters of forgetfulness that Plato himself wrote about. The waters of Lethe that souls drink before incarnation, causing them to forget their divine origins. This would explain why no expedition has found the pillars of Atlantis despite centuries of searching. You cannot excavate a state of being. You cannot carbon date enlightenment. You cannot photograph what exists in dimensions beyond the physical. Yet the evidence is everywhere for those with eyes to see. In Plato's Timaeus and Critias, the only primary sources for the Atlantis story, we find curious details that scholars often overlook. Plato, who was initiated into the Egyptian mysteries at Heliopolis, describes Atlantis through the words of Solon, who received the tale from Egyptian priests at Sais. These priests told Solon something remarkable. They said the Greeks were like children, always forgetting their past, while the Egyptians preserved memories stretching back thousands of years. They spoke of cycles of destruction and rebirth, of civilizations rising and falling like waves on an eternal shore. But here is what most translations obscure. The Egyptian priests used specific terminology that corresponds to their sacred science of consciousness. When they spoke of Atlantis's rings of water and land, they were describing the same concentric layers of reality found in the Egyptian Duat, the multidimensional realm of consciousness navigation. When they described the red, white, and black stones used in Atlantean architecture, they were invoking the alchemical trinity, known to every initiate of the mysteries. The Egyptian connection runs deeper still. The Edfu temple texts, carved in stone long after Plato, describe the homeland of the primeval ones, a sacred island that existed before Egypt itself. These beings, called the Shebtu, possessed the knowledge of divine words and the ability to manipulate reality through sound and geometry. They were said to have preserved their wisdom in hidden halls before a great deluge destroyed their world. This wisdom became the foundation of Egyptian temple science, pyramid construction, and the sacred mysteries. Curiously, these texts parallel not just Plato's account, but also the Sumerian stories of the Apkallu, the 7 sages who emerged from the waters to teach humanity the arts of civilization after a great flood. The same narrative appears in India as the Saptarishis, the 7 sages who preserved the Vedas through the cosmic deluge. But it is in the Americas where the Atlantis memory burns brightest. The Aztecs explicitly stated they came from Aztlan, a paradise island in the Eastern Sea that was destroyed by catastrophe. The similarity between Aztlan and Atlantis is not merely linguistic. Both were described as advanced civilizations centered on an island with concentric rings. Both were said to have fallen through moral corruption. Both left survivors who founded new civilizations. The Hopi speak of the Third World, which was destroyed by water when humanity forgot the sacred ways. They describe flying shields and cities that touched the clouds, technologies that operated through crystals, and the power of mind. These are not primitive fantasies, but ancestral memories encoded in oral tradition. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, accessed what he called the Akashic records and provided thousands of readings about Atlantis. He described 3 periods of destruction, with the final one occurring around 10,900 years before Christ. He spoke of technologies that harnessed the power of crystals to transmit energy without wires, of aircrafts that moved through thought, of genetic manipulation that created hybrid beings. Most remarkably, he predicted that evidence of Atlantis would begin emerging in the late 20th century, particularly near Bimini. In 1968, the Bimini Road was discovered, an underwater formation of perfectly aligned megalithic stones that mainstream archaeology struggles to explain. The mystical traditions have always known what archaeology refuses to see. Atlantis was a bridge civilization, existing when humanity still retained its connection to higher dimensions while beginning to explore physical density. The Theosophists, particularly Helena Blavatsky in her Secret Doctrine, described Atlantis as the 4th root race, beings who possessed psychic powers as natural abilities. They could see into the astral plane, communicate telepathically, and manipulate matter through concentrated will. Their technology was an extension of consciousness itself. This is why no rusted machinery lies on the ocean floor. Consciousness leaves no fossils. Rudolf Steiner, the founder of anthroposophy, provided even more specific details through his spiritual research. He described Atlantean humanity as living in a state of natural clairvoyance, perceiving the spiritual forces behind physical phenomena. Their thinking was not abstract but imaginative, directly perceiving the living forces in nature. They worked with what Steiner called the life force, the same energy the Chinese call qi and the Indians call prana. Their machines were living machines, grown rather than built, organic rather than mechanical. The Atlantean catastrophe, according to Steiner, occurred when humanity began to develop independent thinking at the cost of spiritual perception. The misuse of spiritual forces for selfish ends created an imbalance that manifested as physical catastrophe, but perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from an unexpected source. Quantum physics is beginning to reveal that consciousness is fundamental to reality, that observation affects the observed, that intention shapes probability. What if the Atlanteans understood this 10,000 years ago? What if their crystal technology was based on the principle that certain crystalline structures could amplify and direct consciousness itself? Modern experiments with structured water, scalar waves, and consciousness-responsive random number generators hint at technologies that operate on principles completely different from our mechanistic paradigm. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab spent nearly 3 decades demonstrating that human consciousness could influence random physical processes. Their results, though statistically significant, were small. But what if there were ways to amplify this effect? What if certain geometric structures, specific frequencies, and crystalline matrices could focus consciousness the way a lens focuses light? Consider the pyramids, not just in Egypt, but across the planet. From China to Mexico, from Bosnia to Antarctica, pyramid structures appear wherever ancient civilizations reached their zenith. Mainstream archaeology sees them as tombs or temples, but increasing evidence suggests they were technological devices. The Great Pyramid of Giza, with its precisely calculated dimensions, its alignment to true north, its internal chambers positioned at significant mathematical ratios, appears designed to harness and amplify energy. Recent studies have detected electromagnetic anomalies, unusual radiation signatures, and unexplained energy beams emanating from pyramids worldwide. What if these structures are the last remnants of Atlantean technology? What if they were built by survivors who retained fragments of the lost science? The mystery deepens when we examine the impossible precision of ancient megalithic sites. In Peru, the fortress of Sacsayhuaman displays walls made of stones weighing over 100 tons, fitted together so perfectly that a knife blade cannot slip between them. The stones show evidence of vitrification, as if subjected to intense heat that partially melted their surfaces, allowing them to fuse together. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, we find stone blocks cut with laser-like precision, containing drill holes that maintain consistent diameter through incredibly hard andesite. These sites encode advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge. They align to celestial events. They resonate at specific frequencies. They appear designed according to principles we are only beginning to rediscover. The Coral Castle in Florida, built by a single man named Edward Leedskalnin between 1923 and 1951, demonstrates that this knowledge is not entirely lost. Leedskalnin, working alone at night, moved and precisely placed blocks of coral weighing up to 30 tons. He claimed to have discovered the secret of how the pyramids were built, speaking of magnetic currents and the importance of celestial alignments. After his death, no one has been able to replicate his feats despite having access to modern machinery. He left behind cryptic writings about magnetic current, suggesting that gravity itself could be manipulated through understanding the relationship between magnetic fields and mass. The implications extend beyond archaeology into human potential itself. Laboratory studies on meditation masters, particularly Tibetan monks, have documented seemingly impossible physiological feats. The ability to generate body heat sufficient to dry wet sheets in freezing temperatures. The ability to slow metabolism to near-death states. The ability to influence the quantum field through focused intention. What if these abilities are remnants of normal Atlantean consciousness? What if what we call paranormal was once perfectly normal? Remote viewing, studied extensively by the CIA and documented in thousands of pages of declassified files, proves that consciousness can access information across space and time. The Stanford Research Institute conducted over 20 years of experiments, demonstrating that trained individuals could describe distant locations and events with startling accuracy. The military applications were obvious, but the implications for human potential are staggering. Joseph McMonigal, one of the most successful remote viewers in the Stargate project, described sessions where he felt he was accessing memories rather than gathering new information. He spoke of a sense that all information already exists in what he called the matrix, waiting to be accessed by consciousness tuned to the right frequency. This aligns perfectly with the ancient concept of the Akashic Records, the cosmic library where all events, thoughts, and experiences are eternally preserved. What if the Atlanteans had natural access to this cosmic database? What if their civilization was built on the ability to read the Akashic Records as easily as we read books? The modern channeled teachings about Atlantis, while controversial, display remarkable consistency. From Edgar Cayce to Dolores Cannon, from the Seth material to the Law of One, these sources describe Atlantis as a civilization that reached the peak of technological and spiritual development before falling through the misuse of power. They speak of two factions, often called the Sons of the Law of One and the Sons of Belial, representing those who sought to maintain spiritual principles versus those who pursued power for its own sake. The final destruction came when crystal technologies designed for healing and consciousness expansion were weaponized, creating disruptions in the Earth's electromagnetic field that triggered geological catastrophes. These accounts describe specific technologies that seem fantastical, yet display internal consistency. Crystals that could store information holographically, similar to our emerging understanding of quantum computing. Healing temples where sound, light, and crystalline energy restored the body's natural harmony, paralleling modern research into frequency medicine and photobiomodulation. Transportation systems that utilize the Earth's magnetic grid, explaining the consistent placement of ancient sites along specific planetary energy lines. Communication devices that operated through consciousness rather than electromagnetic waves, similar to documented cases of twin telepathy and indigenous cultures' ability to communicate across vast distances without technology. But here is the crucial point. Every source agrees that the fall of Atlantis was ultimately a spiritual failure, not a technological one. The civilization fell when its inhabitants began to identify with their physical forms rather than their spiritual essence, when they used their powers for domination rather than service, when they forgot their connection to the source. This pattern of rise and fall, of spiritual awakening followed by materialistic decline, appears to be a fundamental rhythm of human civilization. We see it in the rise and fall of Egypt, Greece, Rome, and perhaps we are living through it now in our own global technological civilization. The parallels between Atlantis and our current moment are impossible to ignore. We have developed technologies that would seem magical to previous generations. We can communicate instantly across the planet, access vast databases of information, manipulate genetic codes, and release energies that dwarf natural disasters. Yet we stand at the same crossroads that destroyed Atlantis. Will we use these powers in service to the whole or for individual gain? Will we remember our spiritual nature or lose ourselves completely in material identification? Will we learn from Atlantis or repeat its destruction? Here is a practice drawn from the memory of Atlantis, adapted for modern consciousness. Find a clear quartz crystal, preferably a natural point rather than a polished stone. Hold it in your hands and sit in a comfortable position with your spine straight. Close your eyes and take 7 deep breaths, allowing each exhale to release the tensions of the day. Now, bring your attention to the crystal in your hands. Feel its weight, its temperature, its texture. Understand that this crystal is millions of years old, formed in the depths of the earth through pressures we can barely imagine. It has witnessed ages we have forgotten. Begin to breathe slowly and rhythmically, imagining that with each inhale, you are drawing energy up from the earth through the base of your spine. See this energy as a golden light, warm and nurturing. With each exhale, imagine this light flowing through your hands into the crystal. Continue this for several minutes until you feel the crystal beginning to warm or tingle. This is not imagination, but the actual movement of subtle energy. Now, hold a clear intention in your mind. Not a wish or a hope, but a clear vision of something you seek to understand or manifest. See it as already accomplished. Feel the emotion of its completion. Hold this vision while continuing to breathe energy into the crystal. The crystal acts as an amplifier and stabilizer for your intention. After several minutes, place the crystal where it can catch sunlight or moonlight. The photons will carry the pattern of your intention into the quantum field, where all possibilities exist simultaneously. This is not magic, but applied consciousness technology, the same principle the Atlanteans used on a civilization scale. Practice this regularly, and you will begin to notice synchronicities, unexpected opportunities, and information appearing exactly when needed. You are learning to work with the same forces that built and destroyed Atlantis. The truth about Atlantis is both simpler and more profound than we imagine. It is not a place to be found, but a state to be recovered. Every human being carries within their DNA the memory of this golden age, locked away but not destroyed. The same crystalline structures that exist in quartz exist in the pineal gland. The same electromagnetic fields generated by technology flow through our nervous system. The same consciousness that built Atlantis flows through us now. We are not the descendants of Atlantis. We are Atlantis incarnated into a new cycle, given another opportunity to choose wisdom over power, love over fear, unity over separation. The rising of Atlantis is not a physical event, but a consciousness event. Around the planet, millions are awakening to abilities and memories that make no sense in the conventional worldview. Children are being born with enhanced sensitivities and intuitive gifts. Scientists are discovering that consciousness is fundamental to physical reality. Ancient sites are revealing their secrets through new technologies that detect subtle energies. The veil between dimensions is thinning. What was hidden is being revealed. What was sleeping is awakening. The question is not whether Atlantis existed, but whether we will fulfill its promise or repeat its fall. The same choices that faced them face us. The same powers are awakening. The same potential for transcendence or catastrophe hangs in the balance, but this time we have one advantage. We have their memory, encoded in myth, preserved in stone, whispered in dreams. We know how the story ended before. We have the opportunity to write a different ending. Perhaps you have always felt there was something more. Perhaps you have had dreams of cities of light, of technologies that worked through harmony rather than force, of a time when humanity walked in full knowledge of its divine nature. These are not fantasies, but memories. You are not imagining Atlantis. You are remembering it, and in remembering you are participating in its resurrection, not as a physical civilization, but as a state of consciousness available here and now. The waters that swallowed Atlantis were the waters of forgetfulness. But there is another water, the water of remembrance flowing from the eternal spring at the center of your being. Drink deeply. Remember who you are. Remember why you came. The time of forgetting is ending. The time of remembrance has begun. Atlantis rises not from the ocean but from within the human heart, one awakened soul at a time. The greatest discovery is not finding Atlantis, but recognizing that you are Atlantis. Waiting to remember, waiting to rise, waiting to build the new world on foundations of wisdom rather than sand.